Hey, what does a compressor do? Well, it makes things louder. It makes things quieter when they get too loud. Okay, now what is a compressor for? A lot of people use them as a catch-all device for making things loud and punchy, or just leveling out audio that has maybe too many loud and soft parts and bringing them all to the same volume. And that's fine, you can do that with a compressor, but I don't think it's the most effective use of a compressor. I believe compressors are a tool for changing the color and the attack of your audio. To get into why, we need to talk about what a compressor does and how exactly to use each of the settings. In this video, we're going to be using the Ableton Live built-in compressor, but these concepts will apply to almost every single compressor you can find out there. So in short, a compressor is a device that, when audio gets too loud over a certain threshold, a certain limit you've set, it's going to start clamping down on the volume of that audio, pushing it back closer to that threshold. It's sort of an automatic volume knob telling you to turn it down when it gets too loud. The first setting we're going to be dealing with on the compressor is the threshold. In Ableton, that's this line here, which we can drag up and down, and you'll see why it's a line in here and not just a knob in a moment as we take a listen to some audio. When you're playing audio through a compressor in Ableton, it'll show the peaks of that audio, the places where it's getting loud, and we can bring the threshold of this compressor down below those peaks. And take a look at what happens. Each time the peak pushes through the compressor, we can see it's starting to push down on the volume. This line is the compressor saying, hey, that's too loud. I'm going to push it down a little bit right there. Now, how does the compressor know how much it wants to push down? That's set by something called the ratio. By default, Ableton sets the ratio at 4:1. What that ratio means is for every step past the threshold that your audio takes, it's going to push back 4 times closer to the threshold. If you can imagine it getting 4 steps past the threshold, it'll push it back so it only got 1 step louder. If it got 8 steps past, it'll push it back to 2. That 4:1 ratio is the multiplier of how intensely the compressor pushes down on that audio. The higher this number, the more compression your audio will experience when it goes over the threshold. I can push this all the way to infinity to 1, meaning it will push audio straight back to the threshold 100% anytime it passes it. And you can see it's pushing a lot further down now. If I reduce this ratio, we'll see less compression. Till there's barely any at all. Now, that's fine. We're not really hearing much of a difference, right? Unless you have an ear that's really clearly tuned for how compression sounds, you're probably not hearing much going on when we adjusted that ratio, and that's fine. We're going to cover just a couple more of the settings on a compressor, and then we'll talk about practical ways you can use and hear the compression, so you're actually making useful choices with a compressor instead of just throwing it on a track because it's something you think you should do. Now, there's 2 more knobs here we need to talk about. They are attack and release. You'll find them on almost every compressor out there, and they're the settings that a lot of people tend to ignore because they don't really understand the implications of them. Now, attack and release are words we see on a lot of things in music. We'll see them on synthesizers all the time, and what they always mean is attack is how long does it take for something to start happening? And release is how long it takes for something to stop happening after it's done. What that means in the case of compression is, after sound goes over the threshold, how long does the compressor take to kick into full gear and really push it back? With a long attack, the compressor takes 176 milliseconds before it takes it all the way back to the threshold or wherever the ratio is set. With a quick attack, it wastes no time. It is instantaneously on top of things, pushing it right back to the threshold with no hesitation. Release is the same idea, but at the other end of the process. After the volume relaxes, it goes back down under the threshold, it's quiet again. How long before the compressor releases its grip on the audio and lets it return back to normal volume? With an instantaneous release, the second the audio goes under the threshold, the compressor lets go and lets it go back to normal, uncompressed. With a long release, it could be 3 seconds before the compressor goes Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were back over the threshold. You can come back now. These settings are the most important part of the compressor, and so many beginners look right past them. These are the things that'll let you tune your compressor to get the sound you want out of the audio you're working with. Let's look at a few examples of how to use attack and release in a compressor to make huge differences in how some audio sounds. First, we're going to bring our threshold down so that it's catching most of the hit on each of these drums. So it's probably going to be somewhere down here. Let's take a look. There we go. That looks like it's catching all the peaks. Looks pretty good. And we're going to leave this ratio at infinity to 1 so we can really clearly hear the differences that our compression is making. The last thing we're going to do is turn on makeup gain. What makeup does, if you ever see that on a compressor, makeup is applied after the compression is done, bringing it back to volume, kind of compensating for the compression. And this is how we get the idea that compressors make things louder, because they'll often come with makeup turned on by default. If you can imagine taking audio, clamping down all the peaks, and taking this new compressed, squashed piece of audio and bringing it all the way back up to the top of the volume level. That's how we get the idea that compression makes things really loud and in your face, because they always have makeup on. So we've got ratio set to infinity, our makeup turned on so we can hear these things loud and clear and really hear what the compressor is doing. Let's take a listen to instantaneous compression and instantaneous release. I'm leaving just a little bit of room here because they can actually kind of glitch out a little bit if you leave 0 room for the compressor. It can actually distort your audio a little bit. So I always leave just a little bit of space in the settings there. I have my attack at 0.03 and my release at 4 milliseconds or so. And this is going to be pure, instantaneous, infinite compression. Let's take a listen to our drums without the compressor on first. This is disabled right now. And now with compression. Loud, punchy, almost distorted as it's all pushed right to the forefront right away. And you can see, watch the peaks. It's almost a perfect inverse of what the drums are doing, what the actual volume is doing. It's always perfectly adjusting to keep things right at the line. Let's try adjusting the attack now. We're going to move the attack from its instantaneous position to something that takes a little bit more time. Now it's going to have time for that initial hit to punch through the threshold, be really loud, punch you right in the face. And then the compressor goes, oh geez, I didn't see that, and pushes it down before quickly releasing it back up, which means we're going to hear this initial punch very loudly before the volume drops off sharply, and then we'll hear the tail fade back in. Here's our instantaneous attack, and then I'll move it to the longer attack, and take a listen to the difference. Here's instantaneous, very flat sounding, and now we're going to allow the punch through. And just to compare, here's without any compression. Bring it back in. What if we bring up the release now? What happens? Now, it doesn't bring that tail back in. So we're getting that initial punch. It closes down, and then it doesn't come back up until the next punch through. In this way, it's almost making the initial punch louder than everything else, kind of cutting out the tail. So there's 3 very distinct sounds we can get from a compressor just by adjusting the attack and release. We have our very squashed, fast attack, fast release sound. We have our punchy but roomy, slow attack, fast release sound. And we have our punchy and kind of clipped short, slow attack, slow release sound, which is almost reducing the amount of reverb in the room. These concepts don't just apply to drums, they apply to guitar and horns and vocals and any other instrument you can imagine. Once you understand every setting on a compressor, like we've just gone over, you can apply these concepts to any situation that comes up. If an instrument has way too much punch at the beginning and you want to hear more of the tail of it, you can work with a very fast attack and a very fast release to kind of clamp down on that initial hit and then let the tail come back in with the compression. If you have a sound that you really want to hear the beginning of and then maybe cut down on it a little bit after the initial hit, you can work with a slow attack and slow release to increase the initial hit and reduce the sustain of the remaining sound. Compressors, just like anything else, are tools, and you can use any tool in so many ways. I hope this has made it a little clearer how you can use a compressor to change the sounds you're working with. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll either get back to you there or in a future video. And if you like this video, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this posted every week. Thank you so much for watching. Go make some great music, and I'll see you next time.